Many years ago, when I was working down south, my mum said to me she had a dream that one day she'd foresee me driving a tram. I said, there's no way. I'll never be driving a tram. Got no foreseeable future in that. And here I am, driving a tram, which is quite unusual, really.
Blackpool is still Britain's most popular holiday resort. 17 million people a year come to indulge in the delights of the Golden Mile with its 3 piers and famous tower. But these structures are monuments to another age. Blackpool's motto has always been progress. And 100 years ago, the town was a pioneer in the leisure industry, creating dramatic attractions with new technologies like structural steel and electricity. By combining these two, Blackpool created the first electric tramway, and the trams were once the talk of the town.
They were very beautiful and very exciting to ride in because they were so very comfortable, and they really rode quite like a light railway.
I think everybody's got very, very happy memories of trams, especially the older people. Not one person has a sad memory. It's always things of the past, things they enjoyed. They met the boyfriends or girlfriends on the trams. They can remember, like, one got engaged on a tram. Everybody's got very, very happy memories. It's part of our history. It's Blackpool, it's trams. When the big illumination switch on came on last night, the main attraction weren't the illuminations, it was all the trams. Everybody wants to have a ride on a tram. Trams are a necessity. It's not a dinosaur like certain people keep certain things going, which are no good to anybody, whereas the trams need to be used all the time.
Blackpool still has 75 of them. And as his mother predicted, Steve Cann is now one of their regular drivers.
Check 713.
Right, thanks.
You go to the tower.
Tower.
Yeah. And the tower's
If you've got a really good crew, like we have 2 conductors on double-deck trams, it can really make a good day. If they're fast with the bells and with the controls, it makes my job a lot easier. You up out tonight? I don't know yet, They have a laugh and a joke with the customers. I have a laugh and a joke with them. We all get on great, really well. If you have a bad crew, it could be a really bad day, make a long day. If you've got a couple of miserable ones especially, and there's plenty of them around. We used to have this very well-known character called Ronnie Crossley. If he was on the first Fleetwood tram in the morning, he used to have his coffee pot at the front of the tram, all his shaving equipment up the front, and he used to have a shave while he was going along to Fleetwood and have his cup of coffee. We miss people like that, the characters of the job. There's not many left of them.
Right, 6155. Go to Bristol.
You tend to have this, how can I put it, relationship with trams. There's a bit of character in the trams, whereas on the buses there's no character. On here it's completely different world.
It's a world closer in spirit to the railways and the road. A world of family traditions, public service and things built to last. A complex network of rails, poles, wires and all the other costly hardware needed to provide the service that only trams can give.
One thing that every tourist in Blackpool knows is if you stand by the side of a tram track waiting for a tram, sure enough, a tram will come along. Maybe standing by the side of the road waiting for a bus, you're not quite sure that you're part of that network. You're not really sure you're part of a system that's working. Whereas with a tramway, it is quite different. You can be certain there's a psychological element. You're going to be, the vehicles will come along.
On the bus side, it's different. It's all plastic, metal. There's no wood, there's no teak, there's no character in them at all. They won't last a quarter of the time as what these old balloons and the rail coaches will last. The old trams, it's the smell. The noise is completely different.
The locals call Blackpool's double-deckers balloons. When fully inflated, they carry 100 passengers and keep both conductors busy. They were designed in 1934, and in over half a century of service, they have outlived half a dozen generations of new buses. But immortality has its drawbacks.
What we don't like really about the old trams is that from the driver's point of view, they're very uncomfortable, difficult to see out of. Windscreen wipers aren't built for the job really. There's no windscreen washers on them, that makes it even worse. We get a lot of wind and rain and salt coming off the sea.
Passenger trams date back to the mid-19th century. Riding on smooth rails set in cobble streets, trams were less bumpy than other transport, but horsepower limited their speed and capacity. After attempts with steam power, the breakthrough came in 1885, when the first electric tramway opened on Blackpool Promenade. The open-top trams took power from a live rail in a trough between the tracks. But this quickly filled with sand blowing off the beach. So in 1899, a new overhead wire system was introduced. It will become the standard design for trams the world over.
It was the earliest tram I remember, the Dreadnought, the big Dreadnought, which of course I rode quite a lot as a child. I do remember my mother had a very cheery mongrel, a sort of Yorkshire Terrier type, I think it was, and he had a habit of jumping on the Dreadnought and riding up to Talbot Square, having a little walk round and then coming back on another Dreadnought all on his own. He was always known well by the conductors. They didn't charge him.
Doris Thompson's family started Blackpool's biggest fun fair, the Pleasure Beach, in 1890.
My father had been in America. He was interested in amusement parks, which were then becoming very popular. And he decided to come back home to this country and start one here. And he had his eyes on Blackpool because it was such an up-and-coming place. And of course, when he came up here and realized all the potential with all the heavy industry round about, you know, and all these mills and places, they took their holidays different weeks of the year, and they all came to Blackpool. So you had a continuous stream of holidaymakers coming. That's why he decided this was the place.
And they all came by electric tramcar. The beauty of the system was its simplicity. Electric current, picked up from an overhead wire, passed down through a controller to motors and out via the rails. No clutch, no gearbox, no fuel, and no exhaust. It seemed like the perfect form of road transport. Soon everybody was copying Blackpool. By 1927, there were over 14,000 trams on the streets of Britain, giving mobility to the masses. Fares were low, so people could now afford to ride to work, no longer tied to living in the shadow of the factory. Towns grew and spread out as suburbs developed along the new tram routes. Blackpool's pioneer system also expanded, inland to serve the town, and northwards to the fishing port of Fleetwood, 9 miles away.
Oh, yes, well, of course, it was a marvellous way of getting around. And, of course, I rode them regularly. So did everybody else. Of course, we didn't have cars much in those days. We hadn't a car then. We had a car after the First World War.
But even after the First World War, motoring was still for the better off. With no serious competition, operators saw little need to improve or modernise the trams. Conditions were basic. Their open ends were drafty, the springs were hard, and the seats were hard. But they were cheap, and as mass movers of people, they seemed unbeatable. But by the early 30s, there was competition. Motor cars were getting cheaper. And motor buses were developing fast. With pneumatic tyres, all-enclosed bodies, and upholstered seats, they rapidly overtook the trams in popularity. What's more, buses needed no special track to run on, and soon they were replacing entire tramway systems. But in 1933, Blackpool appointed a new and dynamic general manager, Walter Luff. He persuaded Mac Marshall of the English Electric Company to rush through a new design. The result was the rail coach, a revolutionary machine with all the creature comforts of a luxury motor coach. It was unveiled in Blackpool at a conference of transport managers in 1933.
It was demonstrated to all the transport managers, and one of those present was Alfred Baker of Birmingham, who said, "I'm sorry, Mac, you're 20 years too late," because by this time, all over the country, tramways were beginning to be abandoned. By 1933, 66 tramway systems had been closed, and plans for closing the system in London, Birmingham and Manchester were well in hand.
Undaunted, Walter Luff got Blackpool Corporation to order a large fleet of the new designs, which included the balloon, a double-deck version of the rail coach in which almost 100 passengers could ride in comfort.
When the new trams were delivered in the 1930s, they made a tremendous amount of impact on the visitors to the town because nobody had seen a tram like this before. The traditional tram car was a double-deck, sometimes four-wheeled, iron-clad, curved staircase vehicle in which it was not a pleasant experience to ride on. But when they came on the Blackpool tram, they found, when they stepped on the platform, that it was so luxurious they were rather tempted to look for a mat on which to wipe their feet, and some people even removed their hats when they got on. People were so enraptured by the sight of these modern-looking rail coach-type trams that they used to stand by and let the old cars go past and wait for the new one to come.
Walter Luff had given Blackpool the best fleet of trams in Britain, but most towns were less fortunate. Everywhere the rails were being torn up or buried under tarmac. The confirmation that trams were really on the way out came in 1952.
It was one day, not long ago, London had to say goodbye to her last tram. Sometime, someday, it had to come, and some people were glad to see the back of them. And some of us were sorry they were going, for we'd be missing a sight as friendly as a pleasure steamer, though not quite so silent. One last week to clatter through the streets. Streets that will never be the same now the tram is gone. Now all the paraphernalia that was only theirs is in the attic.
After this, it was downhill all the way. By the early 1960s, the bus was in almost total control, and trams were confined to Blackpool and one other major city, Glasgow, but not for long.
The rail-bound tram is one of the greatest contributors to traffic congestion. As more and more private cars are used and parked in the streets, so traffic congestion increases. Now we are replacing an increasing number of these tram services by large-capacity double-decker buses. From the passenger's point of view, the bus has many advantages over the tram. And of course, there are many advantages from the operator's point of view, too.
By 1962, only Blackpool was left.
I'm very glad we kept ours. It would have been a great mistake to do away with the ones on the promenade. It's nice that they were the pioneers, and also nice that they held on to them when other people let them go. So we didn't make that mistake.
Even here there were cutbacks. The inland routes were abandoned. Millions of visitors still packed the trams each summer, and they continued to provide the year-round service to Fleetwood. But most people now regarded them as just another seaside amusement.
Blackpool wouldn't be Blackpool without the trams. Everybody must have a ride on a tram when they come to Blackpool. It's like getting a stick of rock, you must also have a ride on the tram. Or wear a Christmas quick hat. It's all part of the scene. If it's got a tram in it, people are fanatical over it. Old pictures of trams, kits of trams. Anything to do with a tram, they love. That is what they're after. And that's what they come to Blackpool for. Some little boys come in our shop They just can't wait to get a tram kit or to get on the tram, and they come in and tell you all about it, which number tram they've been on, what it was like, how to have the old wooden doors on, and then they've been on one of the new ones and the differences in it. And all these things people love.
See you now. Don't come back.
We were the very first town in the whole world with electric tram cars, and we're the last one in England to still have them. Environmentally, they're extremely good. They don't pollute the atmosphere. We weren't to know that, of course, but the reason that we did have tram cars, and our love affair with tram cars, is enabled the town to grow so fast.
The tramway system is clearly Blackpool's overground underground. It moves vast numbers of people. In fact, 6 million people travelled by tram last year. It's a place that has devoted its whole effort into making people feel at home, giving people vacations, giving people a good time. It's a place that was simply built for fun, and the tramway system in Blackpool has now emerged as possibly the greatest fun ride within the whole of England.
They're a bit of moving architecture, if you like. Also, I think the fact that they rattle along and they're clearly old and historic things means they're not just a means of transport, they've got a bit of romance about them. And from an operator's point of view, they should capitalise on it, charge extra to go on all these historic trams. I'd like, in fact, more of the old trams brought back to Blackpool. And in fact, a while ago, when I ran the Civic Trust, we suggest they brought trams from around the world. That's historic trams from around the world, from Argentina, from Budapest, from Moscow, and we had a living tram museum, one that actually worked, that people could travel on and get a real sense of adventure and fun.
We're not a museum system, we're actually a public transport operator which happens to use some vehicles which are extremely old. But our role in life is to be a public transport operator. There are a number of quite different markets, some of which are really conflicting with each other. You've got locals who use the tram all year round and who travel every day, come to work in the morning, go home in the evening. You've got the tourists who are actually wanting to go between a particular place and their hotel, or you've got other people who are just happily going for a ride.
Blackpool is like the only open tram track there is in Britain. People, when they come here on holiday, they don't realise there is trams there, because they haven't got them in their town. They think there's no trams here. If they hear a tram, they don't think it's a tram coming towards them or anything. And they tend to get in the way a lot, and that's why we have to be on our toes all the time. But I think if people realise that the driving side of the trams is very difficult, they think they can just stop on a sixpence, and they can't. It does take time for a tram to stop like a train.
One casualty was Coronation Street villain Alan Bradley, who chased Rita Fairclough to Blackpool Strand Hotel.
Rita was walking along the promenade in a semi-trance-like state. She didn't see him.
Get in the car.
And he approached her, grabbed hold of her and bundled her into the car. She fought him and escaped from the car.
Go back, you stupid bitch!
As she escaped, she started to run across the promenade, whereby a tram just missed her. And the tram, unfortunately, hit Alan as he just crossed over in the front of it. And it really does go to show that you really should be aware of the situation with the trams. They are quite dangerous.
At first, I must say, we weren't too pleased with this because of safety aspects and so on, but Granada promised they would make it a nice death, if there is such a thing. And people started writing in from all parts of England saying, can we ride on the Alan Bradley death tram? Which I don't know whether is a healthy thing or not.
Healthy for business, perhaps, but hardly fair to the trams. In fact, Alan was 8 times more likely to have been hit by a car. Keeping the trams working safely depends on the craftsmen in the Blackpool Transport Workshop. Britain may have invented the tram, but tramway engineering is an almost forgotten art in this country. So Blackpool must do all the jobs needed to keep its fleet on the rails, even rebuilding the 4-wheel trucks that carry the body and contain the motors.
Well, when the trucks enter the workshops, they are, as you appreciate, absolutely filthy. So we initially have them steam cleaned, and then they're brought in, stripped right down, all the nuts, bolts, bushes, pins taken off, discarded if they are too bad to be reused. The motor is taken across to the electricians to be checked over. Tyres, the old tyres will be burnt off and new tyres refitted.
Steel tyres can last 150,000 miles. Each tram has 8 of them to be replaced.
It's not like a car factory where you can go in day after day and you're putting the same wheel onto the same position. You come in here, you know more or less what you're going to be doing, but you can't guarantee it. It's varied. It is very varied. We've got to improvise a lot. We've got to save a lot of parts that we do take from other trams that we are renovating. Sometimes we have to take one to rob Peter to pay Paul and so on.
But most spares are out of stock, so when 50-year-old parts break, the ancient skills of the blacksmith are in demand.
The blacksmiths, many years ago, we used to have 5, and then we're down to like 1 now. They are very hard to obtain. He's very versatile because, you appreciate, he's knocking bushes out of a set of bogie trucks. He's bending steel tubing to make new pantographs with. He's assembling the pantographs. He's very, very versatile.
I think in the 30s, this really was a revolutionary design. The streamline look, which was very much the feeling of the 30s, comes across in the vehicles, and over the years the livery has been changed, sometimes to accentuate the streamlining, sometimes to play it down when people's ideas about the look of vehicles had changed rather. And even though you may try to bring in adaptations and improvements as you go along, you're still basically working with something which is getting older as the years go by. Purists may say that we are altering the basic character. We don't think the average man in the street will notice that basic character, because the average person travelling on our vehicle is in fact looking for transport from where he is to where he wants to go.
And for local people, on Tuesdays, that means Fleetwood Market. For this is not just a fun ride along the prom, it's also a link between 2 town centres. Heading north, it passes through Bispham and Cleveleys before reaching its destination 9 miles away. And here it defies all the laws of town planning and all the lessons of history by boldly taking to the streets again, reliving the days when trams and traffic battled it out for road space. But now the rules of engagement are beginning to change. The love affair with the motor car may be waning. Traffic jams, fuel costs and pollution worries are tarnishing its glossy image. And the once despised tram may yet prove to be a winner. For it can also escape from the streets to become more like a railway train. Unhindered by traffic and taking priority at road crossings, it still demonstrates its ability to beat the bus and the car.
I think we're on the edge of an important revolution here in public transport, not just in light rail, but in the whole question of public transport. And it's a revolution which is going to need commitment from politicians, of course, and also from the public in general. We're going to have a culture developing in the UK which says, I'll go by car when I have to do, but I'll go by bus when I can, or by tram when I can. And I think light rail is going to be a very important part of that change, because clearly the way that traffic congestion problems are developing in urban areas, we're not going to be able to carry on simply building roads and building our way out of traffic congestion. We've got to look at new ways of doing it.
Throughout Britain, transport planners are taking a new look at the tram. They use new names, metro, light rail, light rapid transit, but it's the same basic idea. One city did more than look. 40 years after scrapping its trams, Manchester decided to bring them back. Metrolink is the first of Britain's new generation of on-street tramways. When the old trams obstructed the traffic, we threw them off the streets and tore up their tracks. Now those same streets are closed to motor cars, while modern super trams avenge the ghost of their ancestors. The story has come full circle. More than 40 towns are rediscovering the tram, and Blackpool is once more ahead of the field.
We are really stewards of a business that's been passed on to us from people who were making decisions way back in the 1930s about the design of trams, the design of the network, which many people have questioned over the years. Probably about every 10 years somebody says, did we do the right thing? Did Walter Luff, when he was designing this tram, make the right choices? But many of the decisions he was making then have been proved to be right.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that here we are in the 90s now, getting on for the year 2000, and these vehicles, which are approaching 60 years old, are still operating today, after, long, long after, some other vehicles which were set to replace them have gone to the scrapyard.
The town council has had this long continued love affair with electricity ever since the very first street lighting system, since the very first tramway system, and indeed the town's motto is progress, and certainly this affection for electricity has led to a tremendous growth in Blackpool. We've hit problems recently because what you do when you are one of the first people to be inventive and bring out electricity is that we've got an ageing infrastructure. And the council is now faced with a bill of £6 million, not only to relay cabling for the tramway system, but also for the illumination system. The original cabling was put down almost 100 years ago, and it's pretty shot at. And we've got this terrible problem. What do? Do we go in for a diesel tram or an electric tram? And I'm happy to say the council has come over and said, look, we're going to have electricity or nothing at all.
Everybody looked upon Blackpool as a joke because they still had the trams. But now it seems to be all coming back. People used to look upon us as the only tramway in Britain, and now we're not very happy about it because Manchester's getting theirs and Sheffield's getting theirs. But we're ahead of everyone. That's the main thing. We was there first and we're still here. That's the main thing.
In Perpetual Motion next week at the same time, Royal Air Force crews reflect on the departure of the Avro Shackleton.